Going to talk today about changing front lower control arm Mondeo Mk3, which I'm still keeping on the road. Pig of a job this, to be honest. I've just finished it, so I can tell you all about it. It's not that it's particularly involved. I mean, it's really only 3 different bolts to undo and replace. But manoeuvring it and getting the new one back in is, I found, to be quite challenging. I'm covered in bruises and scratches, and it hasn't been much fun, to be honest. But if you do want to give it a go, it's certainly doable on the ground. Be easier on a lift in a workshop, but you can do it on a driveway. What I won't show you in this video, because I've shown it before in my video on changing the steering rack, is you will want to lower the front subframe. Not difficult. You need to disconnect a few things to allow you to do it without damaging anything, and then lower it as much as you can, because that'll make all of this maneuvering business a lot easier when it comes to it, and you're less likely to damage anything. Apparently, if you sort of force it without having lowered it, then you can damage the hydro bushing, which is this one in the replacement arm. Here's a shot of my frame lowered and supported. You'll see I'm using a timber beam and the car's roadside screw jack here. You'll also want that transmission mount tie thing disconnected on the one end, otherwise the frame won't lower as much as it could. Also, there's a cable which runs to the downstream O2 sensor on the exhaust, which I suggest unplugging it, lest it get hung up on it. You can see here how much extra space this achieves, a good few inches. It's important to do for 2 reasons. First, this rear hydro bushing bolt on the arm shown here. The bolt itself has to come out the top, and there's not room unless you've lowered it down quite a lot. And second, to get the new arm ball joint in the wheel hub, you'll need to flex the arm down quite a lot, which doesn't do that same hydro bushing any good unless it's also lowered down on that inside to sort of compensate. There are tales of woe of people splitting open the bushing with too much pressure and it losing all its internal oil. So yeah, you have been warned. The third joint is this simple screw arrangement here at the front. Okay, so that hydro bushing bolt, this is the top of it, and you'll need to get a spanner or a socket on that while you crack the nut on the bottom loose. I found that I could stick my little 3/8 ratchet handle in there. It has to go behind the plastic trim there. Now you can use a spanner, but it's in a little bit of a depression. So if it was a spanner, it would have to be one of those cranked ones. It's just, you've got to make sure that you're able to get on it true and square if you try that. Then you'll want a decent 18mm socket, and I suggest a 6-point version. And yes, you might not have an 18mm socket in a typical socket set. They often go from 17 to 19, and they skip 18. It's an odd size, so you might need to make a special purchase there. Then it just undoes. Because it's a lock nut, which I'll explain later, it can take a bit of work to get all the way off. Next, I loosened this the second screw. This one has its nut, so to speak, welded in as part of the frame, so there's no need to hold the nut side of that one. This is a 15mm hex. Again, I suggest a good quality 6-point socket because these are quite tight. All of these are put together from the factory with thread locker as well. So, even if they're not rusted, you are at risk of rounding things off. And here, I just backed this out a little bit, but I didn't take it all the way out just yet because I wasn't sure if I wanted the arm to shift at this point. I wanted to keep it held in place for the time being. Next, the ball joint, which is a Torx T55 bit bolt head with another 18mm nut on the other side. I braced the Torx sides while turning the nut. The T55 is a larger size, which a everyday, home handyman Torx set might not include again, so that might be another special purchase. Socket on the nut and crack it loose and then undo it. The bolt then should just pull out once the nut's off. If it's rusted badly, you might need a punch to help it through. Now the ball joint will now be free, but it probably won't be loose. It won't come down without some encouragement. I found that my breaker bar handle was just about the right size to use as a lever. Now when you're doing this, be careful of the rubber boot on the joint itself. Of course, if you're replacing it, you might not care, but still. And at this point, I decided to take out that forward screw because it just let the arm sit down another ½ inch, which takes a little bit more of the spring out of it. Yeah, but I probably didn't need to. And then you will need a punch to get out the Hydro Bush bolt. So here you see why it's hard to get this out. My subframe still wasn't low enough. I had to drop it more until it was stressing the exhaust flexi pipe. And even then I had to use my breaker bar to level down the side to finally get enough room for it to come out. Then the arm was loose and out it came. Easy, right? Here's my new versus old arms. Complete assemblies with the ball joints attached, of course. You can replace just the ball joint if that's all you need to replace, but it's a hassle because you have to drill out those rivets and replace them with nuts and bolts. And really, if your ball joint's gone, then you probably should just replace the bushings as well. You can also buy separate bushings and press them in to the existing arm, but I mean, it's a lot of work and the arms are not that expensive. An alignment place had told me a while ago when they looked at it that the bushings wanted replacing, but honestly I'm not sure that there was much wrong with these. I might be wrong about that, but I mean, sure, the rubber looks old on the original. It's it is 22 years aged at this point, but it still seemed pretty stiff. The ball joint was definitely a lot looser than the new one, and the rubber is definitely going on that boot. And the new one was so stiff that I couldn't move it by hand, so there's definitely a difference there. But even so, there wasn't any play in the old one, and from what I've heard, the ball joints on these Ford arms do actually last really well. Anyway, before rushing to put the new bits back in, it's important to sort out the hardware. These bolts are all dirty, and also they have the old thread locker on them, so they should be cleaned. Now, in fact, they should be replaced. Ford instructs you to replace them. But I was happy with the condition of them. I find the bolts on this car are usually in good shape, so I did reuse mine. I just used a wire wheel to clean them up and then brake clean to wash them down. And if you are going to reuse them, you must get all the old thread locker off. So here are those bolts and nuts, and you see there's some Loctite blue for reassembly. Now, one part you cannot reuse is the nut on the hydro bushing because it's a single-use lock nut. It's not a normal nylock either, which you might get away with reusing with Loctite. It doesn't have a plastic ring in there. It just has this sort of blank piece of metal collar which the bolt cuts into as you thread it. It sort of looks like an insert of maybe it's a softer steel or something, some other metal. Now this is the new one I bought. They're not expensive, so definitely buy a new one. And just keep in mind that they're one-time use, so if you put that on and need to take it off again for any reason, you'll need to replace it again. Okay, here goes the new arm. I put the hydro bushing in first and just put that lock nut on loosely because I thought it would be the most difficult otherwise. I tried and failed in a few little tricks here. Firstly, I thought it might work to swing the arm around like so, but no, it doesn't go that way. You have to put it in the correct orientation, unless your rotor's not in the way. And then I put it in the right way with the hub behind it, like so. Nut back on again. As I said before, don't start to tighten this because remember it's a single use. You can't back it off again once you've tightened it. So then I started to try to get the ball joint in the hub without the second frame side screw in, thinking that it might be easier with that loose. But I found it too difficult to move one without the other also moving. So I concluded that both the subframe connections want to be in place. So Loctite here, I put it on the nut side, the frame, the female thread at the end opposite the screw head. And then I found it quite tricky to line up the hole in the arm mounting point with the screw, but eventually I was able to lever it just so with a screwdriver, and I got the bolt in. Well, it's important to say that this should not be tightened or torqued at this point, because the car's weight must be on the arm before it's tightened. It must be left loose for now, but the screw can certainly go in the hole. Then back to the ball joint, and honestly this was the hardest part of this job. It's very difficult, especially if it's your first time, convincing it to go back into the hub. It has to be lined up in just exactly the right way, otherwise it simply will not go in. The new ball joint, as I said before, is quite stiff too, so probably the old one would be easy to work with, but you know, actually the ball joint is so stiff that it resists moving at all, you know, even when you're pushing on it with the hub, in order to change its alignment. And the other thing to be careful of is I found that you can sort of get it part way in, like shown here, where it will then get stuck. And to the untrained eye, it sort of looks like it is in, because the boot is pushing all the way up, and it's it's mating at the hub, but it's not in. You'll see the cutout concavity for the pinch bolt as it goes up. You need to see that go up and past, and it must go into line with the bolt hole. As you can see here, I'm having another go at it, and just with some wiggling of the hub, it just randomly decides to pop up, because I just happened to find the right alignment. And then you can tap it back up the rest of the way, and then it will actually move. Now, if you try this without the right alignment, you'll just hammer it all day and do nothing but give yourself a headache. So you'll see how when it is home, that bushing is all squashed down. It's not extended at all. And then the pinch bolt will go through perfectly freely, and we'll lock it in place properly. To make sure you put the bolt back into the correct orientation, by the way, the nut goes toward the front of the car. And thread locker on the nut, do it up, and the torque spec on that one is 83 Newton meters. I found it was actually easier to put the torque wrench on the bolt head side. It doesn't really matter which way around you do that. Right, now that I was sure that it was all together okay, that lock nut could be tightened up. Because of the locking insert, it doesn't just spin on, it makes you work for it. You have to thread it, through that all the way up. And then the tightening specification for these two inner bolts requires tightening to the set torque and then turning an additional 60 degrees. For now, I'm doing the torque bit. So they want 90 Newton meters on this to start with, which requires a bit of pulling. I wanted to do this before raising the subframe, else it would be difficult to hold the bolt head with a spanner, but do the last tightening later. And then I did raise the subframe. Again, I'm not going into detail, but get the subframe back up and into position and alignment. And next, the suspension needs weight on it. I'm using my floor jack here to lift on the rotor. Now, this is a bit dodgy and I don't recommend it. The rotor is strong enough, but it could turn on you and slip. I was happy enough with this jack in exactly the right place. Also, I should have had the lug nuts on, and I didn't, which was a mission. So yeah, do what I say, don't do what I do. It would be better to jack on the bottom of the ball joint. I just didn't have a block of wood that was sort of the right size lying around. Anyway, the point is to fully load the suspension, which puts the control arm in the attitude that it should be when relaxed, when the car's sitting on the ground. So then, and only then, should you tighten this inner front screw. If you were to tighten it when the arm's hanging down, then the rubber bushing would be forever held firm, by the screw at the wrong angle, meaning that when the car's sitting relaxed, the bushing would be twisted up, so it, then it wouldn't last as long. And I suppose it might not work as it should either. So the torque on this one is 80 Newton meters. And then, as I said, Ford instructs you to then further tighten it another 60 degrees. Now, 60 degrees is, if you think about it, 1 point of a hex, because 360 degrees divided by 60 is 6, right? So this is quite easy to do visually. You just mark a corner of the bolt head and then turn it until the next point comes around. Then I went back to the rear nut and did the same there. Now, you'll find that once these bolts are tight enough, the bolt is being held at the bolt head side, which is the top here, with so much tension that you probably won't need to hold that with a spanner for the counter rotation. It'll just hold itself as you tighten the nut at the bottom. And then you can take the weight off the suspension again, and job done. Right, well that's it then. Don't forget to raise your subframe again. I'm not going to show you that, as I said. If you want to see that, go look at my video, which I'll link to on the steering rack. You don't need to watch the whole video, just the first bit that tells you how to lower it, of course, and reconnect anything that you disconnected. And then when you drive the car, drive it carefully. When you first take it for a test drive, just make sure everything behaves how it should, and probably get a full alignment, because otherwise your tracking might be out, because the way you've done up the bolts will be slightly different to how they used to be. Okay, that's it. I hope that was helpful. Have fun.